The champagne glass was still in my hand when he hit me. I remember that detail more than anything else, the way the glass didn't even fall. My fingers just tightened around it, like some part of me thought if I held on tight enough to something, I could hold on to the moment before it happened too. Rewind it, undo it. But you can't undo a slap. You can only live with the silence that comes after. My name is Alina Marsh, and 3 months ago, I stood in a rented banquet hall in front of 40 people. My husband's family, my coworkers, the partners from my firm, and I smiled so hard my cheeks ached, while the man I married looked at me like I was something he needed to correct. Let me back up. Let me tell you how we got there, because a slap doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from somewhere. It always does. I was 34 years old. I'd worked at Haldon & Cole, a mid-sized architecture firm, for 9 years. 9 years of early mornings, of eating lunch at my desk, of taking calls from contractors at 10 at night because a shipment of steel beams didn't show up. 9 years of watching men who joined 2 years after me get promoted over me, and smiling, and saying, "Congratulations," and going home and crying in the shower where no one could hear it over the water. And then, finally, it was my turn. Senior Project Director, my name on the door, a seat at the table where the real decisions got made. I still remember the moment Mr. Haldon told me. I was standing in his office and he said, "Alina, the partners agree this firm needs you leading from the front." And something in my chest just cracked open, not from pain, from relief. 9 years and someone finally saw me. I called my husband, Daniel, before I even left the building. I was crying in the parking garage, laughing and crying at the same time, and he said, "I'll never forget this," he said. "That's great, babe. We should celebrate." I should have heard it then, the flatness in his voice, but I didn't want to hear it. I wanted so badly to have this one good thing. Daniel and I had been married for 6 years, and if you'd asked me, back then, whether my marriage was happy, I would have said yes without even thinking about it. That's the strange thing about slow damage. You don't feel each individual cut. You only notice much later that you're covered in scars you don't remember getting. Daniel worked in sales for a logistics company, successful enough, respected enough. But somewhere in the last 2 years, something between us had shifted, and I hadn't wanted to name it. Every time I got recognition at work, he'd get quiet for a day or two. Every time a coworker mentioned my name with admiration in front of him, his jaw would tighten just slightly, just enough that only a wife of 6 years would notice. I used to tell myself it was nothing. Men get insecure sometimes. It's normal, it'll pass. It didn't pass, it just waited. His mother, Carol, planned the party. I want to be clear about that because it matters later. I didn't want a big party. I told Daniel a quiet dinner would be enough, just us, maybe my brother Marcus and his wife. But Carol insisted. "This is a big deal, Alina. We have to celebrate properly," she said, and I remember feeling grateful. I remember thinking, for once his family is proud of me too. God, the things we let ourselves believe. The night of the party, I wore a navy dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Nothing flashy, just something that made me feel like the woman who'd earned this. I did my own makeup with hands that were shaking slightly, not from nerves about the party, but from pure joy. Actual, uncomplicated joy. I hadn't felt that in longer than I wanted to admit. Daniel was quiet in the car. I asked him if he was okay, and he said, "Fine, just tired." I believed him, or maybe I just needed to. The hall was warm and gold-lit, string lights strung along the ceiling, a banner that said "Congratulations, ELENA" in careful cursive that Carol had ordered specially. My colleagues came up to me one by one, and I felt, for the first time in years, entirely and completely seen. "Alina, you deserve this so much." 9 years and finally, huh? Your husband must be so proud. I looked over at Daniel when someone said that. He was standing near the bar with his brother and he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It never reached his eyes that whole night. It was around 9 o'clock when Mr. Haldon stood up to give a toast. He talked about my dedication, my leadership, the projects I'd carried through when other people would have given up. He raised his glass and said, "To Alina, the best hire this firm ever made." Everyone clapped. Everyone raised their glasses. Everyone except Daniel. I noticed it. I noticed it the way you notice a single wrong note in a song you know by heart. He wasn't clapping. He was staring at his phone, jaw tight, and when I caught his eye, he looked away first. I told myself later I'd ask him what was wrong. I told myself I'd smooth it over, the way I always did. The way I'd been doing for years without even realizing I'd built a whole second job out of managing his moods. I didn't get the chance. Because 10 minutes later, his cousin Ryan, a little too drunk, a little too loud, leaned over and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "Man, Daniel, when's it your turn to make partners somewhere? Elena's out here running circles around you." He meant it as a joke. I know he meant it as a joke. People laughed, that easy, careless laugh people give when they don't understand what they've just done. Daniel didn't laugh. I saw something shift behind his eyes, something I'd seen small versions of before, but never like this. I put my hand on his arm gently and said, "Hey, ignore him. Let's go say hi to your mom." He looked at me, and for one terrible second, I saw something in his face that didn't belong to the man I married. Something cold. Something that had been building for longer than I wanted to admit. "Don't touch me," he said, quiet but sharp enough to cut. I pulled my hand back like I'd been burned. "Daniel, you've been doing this all night," he said, voice rising now, people starting to turn. "Parading around like you're better than everyone, like I don't even exist." I'm not doing anything, You never think about how this makes me look." His voice was shaking now, and so was mine, and around us the party was going quiet, 40 conversations dying at once as people realized something was happening. 9 years and suddenly you're too important to. "Daniel, please, everyone's watching." "I don't care who's watching." And then it happened. I didn't see his hand move. I only felt it, the sharp, ringing shock of it, my head turning before my mind even understood what my body already knew. The champagne glass trembled in my grip, but somehow didn't fall. The room went absolutely silent, the kind of silence that has weight, that presses down on your chest like a hand. I stood there, cheek burning, ears ringing, 40 faces staring at me and not one of them moving. Not one. Carol was closest to him. Carol, who had planned this party, who had hugged me at the door and said she was so proud. Carol looked at her son, then looked at me and said nothing. Did nothing. Just stood there with her wine glass held against her chest like a shield. His father cleared his throat and looked at the floor. His brother actually, laughed, a short, nervous, ugly sound, like he didn't know what else to do with his face. And I stood there in my navy dress, in the golden light, under a banner with my own name on it, and I understood something in that silence that I will never forget for the rest of my life. Not one person in that room was going to help me. My hand was still shaking when I set the champagne glass down on the nearest table. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that I didn't cry, not then. Something in me had gone very still, very quiet, like a house right before a storm hits. I looked at Daniel. He was breathing hard, staring at his own hand like it had betrayed him, like it belonged to someone else. "Elena, I didn't let him finish. I turned, and I walked out of that hall in my heels, past every single person who had watched and said nothing, and I stood in the parking lot under a streetlight, and I took out my phone with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. I didn't call the police. I didn't call a friend. I called my brother. Marcus picked up on the second ring, his voice warm, expecting celebration. "Hey, sis, how's the big par?" "Marcus," my voice cracked in half, "I need you to come get me right now." There was a pause, and then, in a voice I hadn't heard from him since we were kids, since our father used to raise his voice in that same house we grew up in, he said, "Where are you? I'm already in the car." What Marcus didn't know yet, what I didn't even fully understand myself, standing there under that streetlight with my cheek still burning, was that this wasn't going to end with just a slap and an apology and a quiet return to normal life. This was going to end with the truth, all of it, about Daniel, about his family, about things that had been buried for 6 years. And once my brother found out everything, Marcus arrived in 11 minutes. I know because I counted every single one of them, standing under that streetlight, watching the door of the banquet hall like Daniel might come running out after me, and terrified, actually terrified, of what I'd do if he did. He didn't come out. Nobody came out. That told me everything I needed to know about that room full of people, but I'll admit, some small, foolish part of me kept waiting anyway, hoping someone, his mother, his brother, anyone would push through that door and say, "Alina, wait, I'm so sorry, this isn't right." Nobody did. The party just continued, muffled behind glass doors like I had never been the reason for it in the first place. Marcus's headlights swept across the parking lot, and I have never in my life been so relieved to see anyone. He got out of the car before it had even fully stopped, and when he saw my face, really saw it, the redness still blooming along my cheek, something changed in his expression. My brother is not a violent man. He's gentle, careful, the kind of man who apologizes to furniture when he bumps into it. But in that moment, standing in that parking lot, I saw a version of him I didn't recognize. "Who?" he said very quietly. "Alina, who?" "Marcus, don't. Please, just take me home." "Alina." "Please." My voice broke on the word, and that seemed to reach him more than anything else could have. He looked at me for a long moment, jaw working, and then he nodded once and opened the car door for me like I was something fragile that might shatter if he wasn't careful. We didn't speak for the first 10 minutes of the drive. I stared out the window, watching streetlights slide past in long yellow smears, and I kept touching my cheek without meaning to, like I needed to confirm, over and over, that it had actually happened, that I hadn't imagined it. "It was Daniel," I finally said. Not a question, just a fact laid down between us like something heavy. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning, and I need you to tell me the truth, not the version you tell yourself to make it easier to swallow." So I did. I told him about the toast, about Ryan's comment, about the look on Daniel's face that had nothing to do with one drunk joke and everything to do with 2 years of something rotting quietly beneath the surface of my marriage. And once I started talking, I couldn't stop. It all came pouring out, things I hadn't even admitted to myself. The way Daniel went quiet every time I succeeded. The way he'd make small comments, dressed up as jokes, about how I was married to my job. The way, somewhere in the last year, I had started shrinking myself without even realizing it. Talking less about work at home, downplaying my wins, learning the exact shape of silence that kept the peace. "Alina," Marcus's voice was tight, "has he done this before, hit you?" "No," and then, because I owed myself the truth. Not hit me, but there were times he grabbed my arm too hard. Times he'd get in my face when he was angry, close enough that I'd flinch. I told myself that wasn't the same thing. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "It's the same road, Alina. He just hadn't reached the end of it yet." I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the pull-out couch in Marcus's guest room, staring at the ceiling, replaying the party over and over. The toast, the silence, the way Carol's face had gone carefully blank, the way not one single person had moved to help me. I kept thinking about all the years I'd spent making excuses for Daniel's moods, telling myself love meant patience, meant understanding, meant absorbing someone else's pain so it didn't spill onto anyone else. I understood, lying there in the dark, that I had mistaken disappearing for love. Daniel called 11 times that night. I watched the phone light up against the nightstand over and over, and I didn't answer once. Around 2 in the morning, a text came through. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. Please come home so we can talk about this." I stared at that message for a long time. Please come home. Like the party had happened in some other house, to some other woman, and all I needed to do was walk back through a door and everything would reset. I didn't reply. The next morning, Marcus made coffee neither of us drank and asked me the question I'd been dreading. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I keep thinking about the last 6 years, trying to figure out where it went wrong. If there was a moment I could point to and say, that's where I should have left." "There doesn't have to be one big moment," Marcus said. "Sometimes it's just 100 small ones, and one night they all catch up at once." I went back to the house 2 days later, Not to stay, just to collect some things, with Marcus waiting outside in the car like a promise. Daniel was there. He looked terrible, unshaven, eyes red-rimmed, and for 1 week, exhausted second, I felt the old pull toward comforting him, toward making it okay again. "Alina, please," his voice cracked. "I've never done anything like that before, I swear to you. It was the stress, it was everyone looking at me like I wasn't enough, and I just—" "You hit me, Daniel." I said it plainly, without heat, because I needed to hear myself say it out loud, needed the words to exist outside my own head. In front of 40 people, at my own promotion party. "I know. God, I know, and I hate myself for it, I do. I just need you to understand I'm not that person, But you are," I said quietly. "You were that night, and the scariest part isn't even that you did it. It's that when I looked around that room afterward, not one person moved to help me. Not your mother, not your brother, no one." He didn't have an answer for that, because there wasn't one that could fix it. I told him I needed time. He told me he'd go to therapy, that he'd do anything, that 6 years didn't disappear over one terrible night. And maybe, in some universe, that would have been enough to make me stay and try. But then Carol called me. I almost didn't answer, but some old habit of politeness made me pick up, and I wish, some days, that I hadn't, because what she said confirmed everything I needed to know. "Alina, honey," she started, her voice syrupy in that way I used to mistake for warmth. "I think we all just need to move past this. Daniel made a mistake, but you have to understand the pressure he was under. You were up there getting all that attention, and he felt so small. Men need to feel important, sweetheart. Maybe if you'd shared the spotlight a little more." I hung up before she finished the sentence. That was the moment, not the slap, not even the silence in that room, but that phone call where something inside me settled, quiet and absolute. There was no future in that family where I would ever be anything other than the problem to be managed, the ambition to be tempered, the woman who needed to make herself smaller so a man could feel bigger. I filed for divorce 3 weeks later. It wasn't easy. There were nights I cried so hard I couldn't breathe, missing the version of Daniel I'd fallen in love with, the man who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, who used to be proud of me, or who I'd told myself was proud of me, in whatever quiet, complicated way he'd shown it. Grief doesn't care whether the thing you lost was good for you. It grieves the shape of what you believed you had. But Marcus was there, every single time. He drove me to the courthouse. He sat beside me at the mediation table when Daniel couldn't even look at me. He helped me move into a small apartment across town, one with too much natural light and not enough furniture, and he told me, as we unpacked the last box, "You know this is the bravest thing you've ever done, right?" "It doesn't feel brave," I told him. "It feels like failing." "It's not failing," he said. "You built something at that firm with your own 2 hands over 9 years, and nobody could take that from you. And now you're building something else. That's not failure, Alina. That's the hardest kind of courage there is." 6 months later, I stood in my new office at Halden and Cole, my actual office now, with my name on the actual door, and I looked out over the city and I thought about that night. The golden light, the banner with my name, the silence in that room. I don't hate Daniel anymore. I want to tell you that because I think it matters. Hate takes up room I'd rather fill with something else, but I don't miss him either. I miss, sometimes, the woman I was before I learned to make myself smaller for someone else's comfort, and I am slowly, carefully becoming her again, except stronger this time, except louder. My brother still calls me every Sunday. Sometimes we don't talk about anything important, just work, whether what we're having for dinner. But every single time before we hang up, he says the same thing. "I'm proud of you, Alina." And I believe him. Because unlike that room full of people who watched and said nothing, my brother has never once looked away. If there's one thing I've learned from that night, one thing I'd want anyone listening to this to carry with them, it's this. The way people react in your worst moment tells you everything about who deserves to stay in your best ones. 40 people watched me get hurt and did nothing. One person answered his phone on the second ring. That's the math that matters, not the crowd, just the ones who show up.